Welcome back, everyone. My name is Traap. Tonight I'm going to cover a workflow that I have been using to increase my personal productivity. So what you're seeing right now is just a standard desktop. I'm using Arch Linux as my operating system. Arco Linux B in particular is the distribution that I downloaded and installed. I'm using BSPWM as my tiling window manager, sxhkdrc as my key daemon for doing operating system keys, and I'm using Polybar, which you're seeing across the top of this particular display. So if we look at Polybar right now, you can see I've got three desktops, 5, 6, and 7, that are attached to my physical display number 2, which display 2 for me is in the center. And then you can I will start typing keys. You're going to see them right in this area here. And then over here on the my upper right hand corner, you'll see some notifications occurring as I start. So one of the first things I do every time I start up, I run an upgrade command, and so you notice I typed Alt-U. This particular upgrade is going to go out and upgrade the operating system. It's going to upgrade node packages, Python, Ruby, etc. It will also update and recompile Neovim, as well as compiling Vim, and load all the plugins for both of those editors. I'm going to type in my super secret password. I'll turn keystrokes back on. And now we're going to see that the operating system is going to update. While that's taking place, I generally take a look at any kind of code changes I've made. So if I do a which get s, that is a script that I run, and that script, if I run the alias ggp, it's going to go out there and do a get s pull of all the repositories that I have on this particular machine. So the get s command is a quick way for me to figure out if I've changed anything. So for example, I can see that I've changed something in my Alacrity settings. I've changed the font size. I know that I've changed that font size to 16 point for this particular video. I don't really care about that code change right now. I've also got some notes that I've done in my wiki for installing the OBS Studio, a background removal plugin that I'm experimenting with. So as those things are doing, I can use the system. Recall from other videos that I've done that I am using TMUX, and within TMUX I've got that navigator working, so I can navigate back and forth between these TMUX sessions pretty quickly. I want to go over the status line that's at the bottom of my screen. So you notice in my lower left hand corner, you see the name of my computer, the operating system I'm running. Upgrade is the name of the TMUX session. Admin is the name of the window. 2 is the split. So if I look to the left, that's number 2. If I hop back over to the right, you're seeing that number change from 1 to 2. That becomes more obvious when you start having multiple splits. So for example, if I go back to this side and I just do another split, now I've got a number 3. So I can look at the bottom of my screen and just get a quick idea of the name of the TMUX session, the window that I'm on, as well as the split number that I'm in. That'll become pretty obvious with something else we're going to run here in just a minute. So as this was running, I can toggle this on and off as well. So what I've just done is I ran a command that's basically toggled the window class, and it brings it right back up. So regardless of what I've done, that Windows class is there. I can actually kill the Alacrity session right now. So this is going to simulate a crash. So if I just do my super Q key, which crashed it, the window class is still in the background, so I can toggle it right back on. So what I'm going to do next is go over the steps that I took to do the Windows class and make this session toggleable. And in doing that, I'm also going to give credit to the 2 people that I followed their videos. They did a really nice job on 2 different parts that I'm using, and I'll explain each one and show you how I use it. And then the third step of this demonstration is actually to do some customization of Neovim. The next step we're going to do is we're going to hop over to desktop number 6 over there, and we're on the new desktop. And the next step that I do is I'm going to run another alias command. I'm going to run another toggling command, which is going to bring up another TMUX session. So I'm going to do, in this case, it's going to be an Alt-Y for YouTube. And now this brings up you see in the top, it toggled my YouTube session. So right now, it just kind of looks like TMUX, not a big deal, but there's more going on in the background on this particular one. So let's take a quick look at TMUX. So we'll do in my case, the leader key is going to be Control Space. So we'll do that Control Space W. and you notice there's 2 named TMUX sessions, so I can move around between those sessions rather quickly. So if you have never used multiple sessions in TMUX, I enjoy renaming them because it gives me context of what I'm working on. So what you're seeing at the top is the session, and this is the window name, admin. It becomes a little more obvious when you look at YouTube, because in YouTube I have 3 windows attached. Each window has 1 session, but I named each window, so I've got coder, notes, and demo. So if I wanted to go to any one of those, I can just move up and down. So we started with notes. If I want to go over to another session, I can jump to that window, so it's in the same TMUX session but another window, and I do that with the TMUX leader key and then the number 1, 2, or 3. So if you've done harpoon style navigation, it's a bigger keystroke, but you can see it works. And so it's not obvious what's happening because I don't have anything running right now, but notice the word demo and 1, and now it's got coder and 1. So to prove that's actually a different session, let's just do a bash top. And it's just a console utility that shows you what's going on with my bash and my CPU, that sort of thing. So if I go back to number 1, there's my wiki page. Number 2 is the bash page. Number 3, we'll just do an ls. So you can see that all 3 of them are doing something different. Now if we go back to the TMUX window navigator and I go back to the top of YouTube and I'm looking at all 3 windows at the same time, I can get an idea of what's going on in each window. I see the number and the name of the window, and they're centered across the bottom. They're split. Now, if you start doing 5 or 6 or 7 windows, that bottom area does get pretty tight, but it kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. So if I want to hop back over to bash top, I can move it this way. If I select the top, it's going to go over to whatever the last one was. Now remember I'm on Dark Knight running the Linux operating system. I'm on the YouTube TMUX session. I'm in the demo window. I'm on split 1. So if I do another split, that's going to be, and another split, and another split. Now you can see that you're going to notice demo itself doesn't change, but the number is going to change as I move between TMUX panes. Okay, so you can see them changing as I move. Now I'm using that TMUX Navigator plugin that Chris Tomies developed a couple years ago. A great plugin. I use it all the time. I enjoy it. It makes my Vim, my Neovim, and my basic TMUX experience the same. So I really enjoy using that plugin. If you haven't tried it, take a look at my configuration. It's easy to set up. It's great to use, and it really has increased my productivity. So we'll go ahead and quit the bash top because we don't need that running. Which, okay, now we're going to go over to back over to the YouTube main menu. So this is now I'm going to go through how I've actually made those bindings work. So the first thing we're going to do is look at my standard wiki page. If you've seen other of my videos, you know I do this all the time. These are just talking points for myself. So I've got these TMUX sessions that I can create with an Alt-S, Alt-W, and an Alt-Y that you're seeing on lines 9, 8, and 7 down here, okay? So line number 8, 9, and 10. So if I do an Alt-W, it's going to bring up my main wiki, and Alt-Y brings up the YouTube, which is what I'm in right now. If I do an Alt-S, I'll do that one right now, Alt-S, it brings up a scratchpad right there on top. So that's a floating window, I can move it around. But because this is TMUX, I can go in and I can actually kill that window. But because this is TMUX, it's still there. Scratchpad is still there because I killed the window. TMUX still knows about it. Plus, this is also toggled in that I've got a Windows class that's backing it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hop back to the notes, and we're going to take a look at this sxhkd and toggler and AO. We're going to take a look at those 3 scripts really quick because that's really the meat and potatoes of this thing. And then when I'm done with that, we're going to go right into doing some customization of Neovim itself. So the first file we're going to look at is we're going to take a look at BSPWM. Because I have a certain workflow, a lot of times I've got Harpoon already set up, so I just go out there and check, and I do, in my case, it's Alt-7 brings up the Harpoon menu. So you can see I've got those 4 files already set up. Harpoon keeps track of that on a per GitHub repository level for you. So as you move around your root directory, Harpoon will keep 4 files. I use this quite a bit. It makes it really easy for my YouTube videos. Another thing that I do that I find pretty good is when I know that I'm going to talk about certain content, I've done other videos where I show you the to-do comments that Folky's done, and it's a really good plugin. So I just do find YouTube, and it's going to show me the files that have a YouTube marker in them, and then I can preview those changes really quick. So if I get to babbling on or something like that, you know, when I'm doing a video, then maybe I can go back and say, well, what was I talking about? And just go right back into YouTube, and I asked Telescope to go find these things for me, and Telescope goes off and finds the to-do news for me. So when I look at this particular first hit, it's in the sxhkdrc file, and then if I go down, there's the AO file and there's the toggler file, which also happen to be the same files that I want to look at from a telescope standpoint. So I've got a couple ways that I can find things. I can use my to-do list jump list, which is powered by Telescope, or I can use the Harpoon jump list, which is powered by Harpoon. And if I really get lost, I can just do a find file and do a find with grep, and I can find things. So it really depends on what I'm doing, and sometimes it's whatever the first thing is that comes to my mind as I'm typing. So now what we'll do is I'm going to just bring that Harpoon menu back up, and we're going to go ahead and look at this sxhkdrc. That's a mouthful, by the way. So you're going to notice right away in my notes up here that it's just going to point this out. The reason I struggle sometimes when I'm behind the keyboard, I have 4 different keyboards that I use, and none of them have the same physical layout. So if you notice, I use the Apple Mini wireless keyboard. I like the low profile, but notice on the left-hand side of that keyboard, that's where the function key is. So you got the function, control, alt, and then the super key, and then the space key. If I'm dealing with my gaming keyboard, the control and the function keys are backwards. And then over on the right-hand side, you got this print screen, and you got a control key. So it's really difficult to swap between keyboards all the time. And then, of course, my laptops are no better. One laptop is a Razer, one laptop is a ZA Reason, and they have different keyboards altogether. So I've got some key bindings that are duplicated between the Alt key and the Super key, and that's because of the key. It's the key that's closest to my space bar. So if you look at the space bar, the way I've got that up there, some keyboards that's the Alt key, some keyboards that's the Super key. So it does get a little confusing, and I have to sometimes look down at my keyboard to just remind myself physically what keyboard am I actively working with. So if you've seen some of my other videos, you know I use folds quite a bit. So I can do a ZM and close everything up, and you can navigate folds pretty cool. So I'm going to look at this start application, and what we care about is down around 32. We're going to go down a little bit further, but we'll go down to the YouTube 28J. We'll run that one here. So let me explain what you're seeing right here. So the super hot key daemon, it's a daemon that's running in the background, and it's looking for any combination of keys that you press. Now it's going to run a command. So in this particular case, if I run Alt-E, it's going to run this script called NvMS. You've probably seen some other videos that I do on that, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. So the Alt-E, it's on a different monitor. I'm sorry, wrong key. I'm going to do a Alt-E. There it goes. So there's that NvMS script. So I can go down through that list, and I click one of those particular plugins, and you know, it's going to install that Neovim environment. Recall from my other videos, the only requirement there was that distribution, if you will, that I'm installing, it must bootstrap itself to work. Okay, so I play with these things quite a bit. I can cancel that thing because I don't need it, so I just close it and go away. So then I've got this notifier toggler for NVIM down on line, let's talk about what line number it is. So on line 182, I can do a Neovim toggle. On line 184, it's going to be scratchpad. You saw me run the upgrade, and you're seeing me use the YouTube right now. So it's basically doing a send command. So we'll go ahead and hop over to desktop 7 really quick, and we're going to run the Neovim command, and then we'll come back to desktop 6. So if we hop over to 7, and we just simply do an Alt-N, okay, great. We've got a session for Dark Knight. It's called Linux on the Linux operating system. The TMUX session is called NVIM. I'm in Coder, and I'm in Split 1. Okay, that did exactly what I expected to do. So now what we're going to do is kind of go back and figure out how all these piece parts work together, so you can see some of the other stuff that I'm doing that becomes pretty powerful and where I got the ideas from. So we're going to go back to desktop number 6, and at this point, you know, we will go back to our Harpoon menu, and Harpoon was Alt-7, and we're going to look at the actual toggler script. So if you notice, we ran an NvIM notify. I'm sorry, we ran a notify send command, which sent a message to the operating system, which displayed in the upper right-hand corner of my screen, telling me what I'm doing. And then it runs a command right after that. So I can stack these commands. I can have multiple commands running. The syntax is pretty simple. You just got to end the syntax correctly, and it's pretty easy to use. So I just got a few of them set up. So the toggler command is the next piece that we want to look at. So notice we're running a command. We ran a command toggler NvIM, or we ran a command toggler upgrade, or we ran toggler loop YouTube. So let's go take a look at what those togglers are doing, because this is pretty simple stuff here actually. But the first thing we want to do is we want to give out a shout out to Jake at Linux and take a look at his video. So you do the GX here. It's going to launch your setting. We're not going to watch this video. I will have the link for this video in my description. If you have not seen Jake's video, please watch it. He does a really good job explaining step by step how to build one of these toggler files, and he gives you the rationale of why you can put it together. He designed it for using a scratchpad. I liked it. I simply expanded it to do other things than just a scratchpad. So if you remember, the scratchpad for me was the Alt-S key, and it brings my scratchpad right back. So I can toggle that thing on and off as fast as I can type. Now, in the context that we're right now, we're using YouTube, and we have a browser up and running. If I toggle the YouTube on and off, you're going to see the tiling window manager do some magic. So one window went away, the browser took full screen. When I bring the YouTube back, now it's on the right hand side. Not a problem. The tiling window manager took care of that. But if I want that to rotate, I'm just going to rotate it backwards. So I'm just rotating 90 degrees, since there's only two frames, window frames that are up, if you will. They're just swapping places with each other. So we can toggle that as fast as we want to type. Okay. So if you have more frames open, or more windows open from a BSPWM standpoint, it will rotate those in a predictable manner as you're using the rotation keys. So if we look at toggler, I'm going to go ahead and zip up a couple things here. We'll go ahead and close the browser for right now because we don't need it. But what we're going to do is we're going to close up a couple things and take a look at this winclass function. So in the winclass function here, what we're doing is we're using the xdtool command to search for a class name, and that's argument 1, whatever's passed in. So in the case of upgrade, the class name was upgrade. And then we look for that Windows class. If it doesn't exist, we create it. So notice that on line 13, we're setting default into some directory, wherever you want to run from. And then in my case, I'm running Alacrity, and the syntax is you have to use the class name comma separated twice. And then you specify the command you want to run, and I'm running the AO command with whatever parameter 1 was as well. So parameter 1 is used consistently in the toggler script as well as the AO script. So if we go down to the next section, what we're going to see is I'm going to validate the input choices, because right now I'm only supporting a few things. So I've got the NvIM, the scratchpad upgraded, the wiki, and the YouTube. I did use I made the names for the sessions capitalized for the first letter. I chose to do that to make my status bar look a little bit better. You can do whatever you want with that, but so you can see here that all we're running is the toggler command, created the Windows class ran the AO command, and that's it. Really simple. So if we start from the beginning, the key binding fires the toggler class, the toggler script fires the AO script. So if we go back to Harpoon jump list, go right to AO, here's the AO. So the AO script is nothing more than it's a collection of several different ways that I create TMUX sessions. So the one we want to take a look at to start with is this upgrades. You notice here that I created a window, and I named that window admin, and I created a horizontal split, and I sent keys to each split. So I sent different script names to different scripts, to different splits. So split 1 got the upgrade script, script 2 got the get s correct script. So normally to do that, I would create terminals. So I would do something like create a terminal cd, do .b, and then I would do get s or something like that. I'm eliminating all those steps of creating windows and typing and navigating and just letting this AO script do it all for me. So the shout out that we want to do here is for Doug Bell. So Doug Bell did a really nice video. This is dated back to 2019. If you've never seen this video, I really recommend you watch it as well. So Doug does a superb job explaining why the rationale he used to come up with this style that he was using setting up his TMUX. The basic gist of the entire video is that if you think of being a developer, whether you're front end, back end, or maybe you've got to do a little bit of both, when you set up that environment to go from project A to project B, when you've got different backends, different programming language, different needs, that can be very time consuming to set all that up. So if your system has enough disk space and has enough RAM, has enough compute power, then why not set it up one time and just toggle back and forth between them? So what I then did was I liked what Doug was doing. I started using that. I liked what Jake was doing. I said, why not just jam the two ideas together and make them both work together? So that's where I came up with just launch it, the whole workflow, just have the whole workflow launched from my operating system key daemon file. So that works out really well for me. So typically what I started noticing I was doing as I was working on these videos is I always had my to-do notes, or this is what I wanted to make sure I was going to discuss. If I lost track of where I was, I kind of go back to this page really quick. Sometimes I'd cut that out of the video, maybe you didn't see it. But then I'd also say, well, I'm going to do some coding activities, whatever coding happened to be. So a lot of times when I'm configuring things, you might see me doing things like go into my YouTube directory, go to the LSP directory, and then just Neovim and pick up test dot TypeScript. Okay, and all of these scripts that I have in here are all doing the same thing. They're just in different programming languages. They're really a rudimentary Fibonacci sequence. But the reason I'm doing this is because I want to do things like test.lua. I'm confirming that my language servers are set up correctly, my debugger is set up correctly. So having a couple test files I can hop into really quickly to do some extra testing tended to work out really well. So what I found that I needed my notes, so that was that screen, which was the wiki page. This was whatever I was, that was the coder, if you will. I'm coding something. And then I used number 3 to actually do the demo. So I wanted to come up with a way that I could set this environment up consistently all the time. So I thought TMUX is great for, setting up a session with multiple windows and attached. Okay, that was great. And I got Doug Bell gave me that idea. And then Jake was doing the toggling thing. So I thought, this whole thing of toggling, I thought, that's really pretty cool. So I can move that on and off fast. Prime Engine can't even type that fast. I mean, I just as fast as I want to type, that thing's toggling. So that's pretty cool. That was a joke, Prime. I know you can type faster. So anyway, that works really well. And so if you think about like Harpoon, I use that quite a bit. But what I like about it is that when I need that very small subset of files that I'm working with, I can set up my YouTube video and I've got it right there for those 3 main files that I want to jump to. If I want to look for other things that maybe go beyond, or I want to call out a specific piece of code, maybe it's in the file, that's where that find YouTube command works. That's where that power of bringing Telescope together with to do comments allows me to find things really, really quickly, and then I can navigate through the code really quick, and I can find the one I want to talk about, and I can hop to it and get into it pretty quickly. So what we saw was I went through the key daemon file with you, showed you how I launched that, and then I went over to the toggler and showed you how the toggler, I'm using the YouTube thing, that's the one we're in right now, so that created that YouTube session. And then I went over to the AO file, and in that particular one we saw that I got to go down one more, sorry. When I went over to the AO one, that one, if I hop into that file, it's just YouTube This is the YouTube session, TMUX session. Put that back and do that. Okay, so that's fine. If I write that file, and now in that AO file, we've got it right there. So what I can do is, if you think about this from a productivity standpoint, you know, I'm in some file. I've got my folds turned on, so I can kind of navigate the file mentally with my comments and kind of know where I want to go in the file based on what I'm seeing. If I have a broad idea of where I want to go with files, I will know which kind of file I want to go to, then maybe I hop around with Harpoon to get me to a particular location. Sometimes I'm going to go right back and do that find YouTube command, because in this particular contents, I know I'm dealing with a particular file, but I'm not exactly sure which one I want to talk about yet. So maybe I navigate this way just so I can do a quick flip on the screen and figure out which one I want to talk about and say, you know what, I really wanted to talk about, you know, I really wanted to talk about the upgrade one, so go look at that one, bring it up, and then boom, there I am. And if I want to do that again, I can do that within the same file, which is okay. I just, you know, it's really about, as you're working, sometimes it's what's the fastest thing you think about, and just as long as the key binding, the muscle memory is there, then boom, you got it and you're ready to go. I'm going to focus on the part of how I customize Neovim. This part of the configuration is very specific to answering a user's question that he wanted to know how he could maybe use some of the things that I've written and be able to do so in such a way that maybe didn't conflict with anything he was trying. So I'm hoping what I'm doing here, I've done a really aggressive refactoring of my Neovim to try to accomplish that task. So we're going to go over that. So you're seeing down on line 25, I'm going to start the video LazyVim personalization. We're going to hop over to desktop number 7. We're going to start a Neovim environment. We're going to use the Alt-N key for that. We're going to go over the Lua config overview. We're going to show you how I do my customization. We're going to go through some plugins. We'll tie into a couple plugins to show you maybe what you can do to actually literally just copy some of my environment, put it into your own workflow, and try to give yourself the ability to customize and experiment with different things that are going on in LazyVim. So we'll hop over to desktop 7 now, and we're going to do that Alt-N key. This is going to launch Neovim. Now it doesn't look like a lot's happened, but you're noticing in the lower right-hand corner of my screen that the workspace is being analyzed because this is the Lua file that's come up. I know that my startup time is pretty slow because I've got a lot going on. When I say it's pretty slow, if I go in and look, I'm probably going to be somewhere around, you know, 140, 150 milliseconds, because I started up this with a bunch of plugins being loaded with the way I ran. Neovim is started and it's loaded. You saw that the workspace was being analyzed. Remember, this window also can be toggled. So this Windows class also allows me to toggle it. So I toggle it on and off. So that also works if I crash TMUX, or I actually crash. Well, actually, TMUX is still running in the background. So is the Windows class. The Windows class is still known. So I can toggle it and it comes right back to where it was. So here's something that's kind of cool too. If you do Harpoon and do that, if I go ahead and, you know, toggle it off, so that's that Alt-N for me. Alt-N, bring it right back. So it actually brings back the Windows class and remembers the Windows state, which I thought that was pretty cool. It was kind of a neat bonus for the way this is all glued together. So what I want to do is I'm in my typical Windows and Neovim init.lua file. You can see there's not a lot in it, but something I want to show you is when I typically am editing and customizing my Neovim configuration, I typically deal with multiple files for different purposes. So one of the things I've done is when this started, if I do a find buffers, you're going to see that there are several buffers that are already loaded for me. That's because when the AO command ran for NVim, it started NVim with all these buffers loaded. So I've already got them loaded into my environment. So if I get out of telescope and get out of telescope all the way, and I do next buffer, previous buffer, I can navigate that way. I can also, depending on what I'm doing, I can also take a look at any telescope file, Harpoon settings that I have set up. So typically I use Harpoon. That information is kind of sticky, so it survives for the repository that you're in. So I typically have these particular files coming up. So I wanted to bring a couple of them up. We're going to add one to this list. So we're going to talk a little bit about how I do customization and the globals and things like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my globals file, and I'm going to find that using NvChad tree. And so it's told me where it is. So if you've used Lazy before, you know that LazyVim has by default 4 files that it looks for: auto commands, key maps, lazy, and options. To make my environment separate from anything else, all I've done is redirected those particular files to my location. So it's config.traap auto command. So if you already have a lazy configuration and you want to experiment with something of mine, just add this require statement somewhere inside of your auto commands and then copy my Traap directory, and you'll get everything that you need for my functions and things like that I use. So that file is consistent with all of them. So they're all that same, except for lazy. Lazy I don't redirect. So I'll go over what I'm doing with lazy really quick, because I found that lazy's made some really interesting changes lately. So what you see is my setup is I am doing as much as possible to use the default plugins from LazyVim, and then I customize them where I want them customized, or I disable them if I don't want them being used. So I'm going to show you now how I go about doing that. So part of my refactoring that I did, we're going to go through some of the files that I refactored. In my functions directory, I've got a key map function. Most of us do. I just put it all, so I have a function in this file, and that's the only thing that this does. So if you think from a computer science standpoint, separation concerns, high cohesions and coupling, things like that, I want this file to be very, very high cohesion, meaning it does only one thing, but I want it very loosely coupled so I can break it apart and move it around very quickly. So you're going to see the same thing with my logger. I've got a logger, it's a single function in this particular file. Nothing fancy. I use it sometimes when I want to experiment with some things, but I have a function already there that I can use. My plugins, there's nothing fancy here. It's just a quick and easy way for me to get some information. So if I want to determine is something a default, is something in TMUX, etc., I have a function for that. So let me bring up a parallel to this file so you can kind of see the two playing together. So we're going to look at go back over to the NvChad tree, and we're going to, oh, by the way, since this is just another buffer, if you want to do set number, if you feel comfortable navigating a tree that way, that's fine, because I know that I want to jump down to one of the files. So if I'm at the top of that list, and I know, for example, that I want to jump down to the file called globals, I know I can do a search. I know I can do that. That works, that's perfect. But if I just want to jump by line number, you can turn that thing on if you wanted to, and you can make that permanent if you wanted to. And then I could do 16G, and I go to the right file if I typed it right. Now remember, because this is NvChad tree, I can run commands to do a split. So I can create a split, turn off NvChad tree. Now I can use these two files at the same time. So what's on the right is the globals, which is a global function. So constants is require, config, trap, constants, customize, etc. Okay. So you can see when I'm doing is enabled, I'm looking into a table to find out is the enabled flag set true or false. So you can see on the left hand side of my screen we have that function that I'm calling is enabled. So if I look for is enabled in here, that's on line 16, you're going to see that this particular function calls an internal function is enabled, and it's got the error handler set up. So the error handler and the underscore is enabled, those are internal functions, so they don't get exposed. But I expose the public functions, if you will, so those are the things that are part of the M table. I expose those and I bring them out as something called, is enabled. I have one called NTMUX, and that's looking at, NTMUX is going out there to figure out, is my environment in TMUX? If that's true, then I can load some extra plugins when I'm in TMUX. So those commands become pretty useful to me to make customizing my plugins a little bit easier. So what we want to do now is we want to go back to that harpoon list, And we want to take a look at one of the plugins just to show you how simple it is to make a plugin configured. So this is the NvChad plugin. It's doing the colorizer. I can tell it's working because red, green, blue are colored correctly. The hex values are colored correctly. I can see that right in my screen. I also happen to notice that the way that I know that the way that plugin works, if we do something like, and I'm not great with colors, but if we start changing those colors dynamically in real time, it will change them. So if you've got some kind of speed key set up, and that's not going to work because it's going the wrong way, it's not hex value, but you get the idea, right? You get the idea. You can, if you've got some kind of ramping, you can do some ramping. You just have to realize what I just did. It wasn't aware that I was ramping in hex. So this particular plugin, I noticed when I was doing the refactoring that I was always using the plugin name throughout my file. So if I go to the top of this file and we search, let's get out of that and go back to the top, and we're going to search for the word plugin. Okay, so I noticed, ignoring comments and just looking at code, you see the word plugin used 4 times. I hate duplication because I'm a horrible speller and I want to get something right one time and I want to use it all the time, especially when dealing with strings. So if you notice on line 9, we've got the name of the GitHub repository, top level repo, which is NvChad, and the plugin is nvim colorizer.lua. That is the key to a table that we're going to look things up in. So this is enabled function global that we've already seen. Use default config plugin. We've already seen that one. All they're doing is looking into a particular file to see what's going on. So let's go hop into that customization file right now. So we're going to go back to the harpoon menu and we're going to go to customize. We're going to hop on. Customize table is just a standard Lua table and it's pretty straightforward. It has as the key, if you will, think of it as a dictionary. It's got the name, which is the plugin. That is the key that we specify when we're doing lookups, and we're indexing into this table to determine if something is enabled. When we're looking at defaults, the question is, are we going to use default options, default config, or default keys? So anytime those are true, you're using whatever LazyVim has specified. That implies that I can enable a plugin, I can use disable the config, enable the options or customize the options and customize the keys. So I can have fine-grained control over that. So if we look at line 21 below, notice that comments.nvim, I don't want that working right now, so I've got the enabled flag set to false. So on line 21 we'll move down and you see that that one is currently set to false. Lua snip, it's true, it's enabled, and the options are default true, so everything's true there. That's exactly what I would expect, right? Some of the ones that I start to customize though is like when I use get signs. So if we look down to 13 down below, get signs, yes, it's enabled, but I do not want to use the default LazyVim settings. I've got some personalization I want to do with get signs. Maybe I don't need them. I just want to experiment. Okay, so this is the way I go about doing that. Another great one to look at is telescope. Telescope is kind of fun to look at because there's so many different things that you can do with the telescope configuration. So what I'm going to show you here is that telescope is enabled. The options, default options are false. The config is true, but the keys are false. So let's take a look at how I would go about how I've configured telescope so you can see a little bit more a deeper version of how I go about conversion. Let's take a look at a little bit more complicated setup. So we're going to do a find file on telescope, bring it up, and while we've got it in there, we'll do that Alt-8. So now it's in our list. So we go back to telescope using harpoon really quick. So there it is. So I've already discussed it and it is an enable flag, but what notice on line 2 down here below, on the relative record line 2, they're saying is this enabled and not use default plugins, not use default keys. So what I'm doing there is, yes, I enabled the plugin, but I don't want to use the key bindings that that the LazyVim team has set together. Not that they're bad, it's just I wanted to try something different, right? So most of the key bindings, not all, but most of the key bindings that I use are consistent between Vim and Neovim. It's taken me a long time to keep those two consistent. And that's one of the biggest challenges that I have using anybody else's plugins is the key bindings. I've got key bindings, and yet they end up being tightly coupled with somebody else's deployment, and that makes it challenging when I don't know what their key bindings are. I have to go, it slows you down, right? I just want to find a file. For me, it's leader FF, so it's you just have to learn. But in some cases, if I want to experiment with what the defaults are, then I turn that flag true, and then it forces me to use the key binding. So in that case, I'm probably going to use which key quite a bit to bring which key up to actually see what that key binding is. Okay, so we've got this enabled, flag not enabled for the keys. So that gives me the ability to do my own keys. Then when I look at the telescope part of it, I'm going to notice here that yeah, I was going to change that. So that's one of my to-do notes to myself. So I was supposed to do this. So this is something I forgot to do for this YouTube video. So now it's there. So when we say that the file, we do a find YouTube, there it's going to be, there's that YouTube marker I wanted to find when I did the find YouTube. So what you're seeing here is just some of the ways I work, right? I try to get really productive. I'm moving around quite a bit, kind of fast all the time. But if you're going to see that same pattern. So but what we're going to do here is we're going to do a find buffer, and we know that I had the there was the colorizer in here, so I'm going to go down here and find colorizer. I've got to be kind of slow when I'm doing this. There it is right there. I should be able to do a Control V, because this is telescope doing this. So Control V and telescope should bring me up a vertical split. Boom, there it is. Okay, so learning a few of those keys, now I can kind of look at these two plugins at the same time, and I'm noticing, ignoring the comments at the top of the one file, I got this, both of them are doing this require config Traap globals, okay? And then the plugin itself is the name. There's this thing called local plugin. Okay, that's consistent. So on the telescope side, if I search for, if I go here and use the star key to do the search for me, I've got plugin once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. So you notice it's counting for me too, right, as I'm doing that. So anyway, if you go down and count, that's one of the plugins. So one of the plugins is telling you, you're on, 4 of 7, 5 of 7, 6 of 7. So that's a plugin that comes with LazyVim. If you don't like it, you disable it. So if you go track what that plugin name is, I'd go into my table and I'd set enable flag, set it to false, and I'm done. Right? It's that simple. So in looking at it this way, I'm able to really quickly look at something that's a little more complicated. So in the case of telescope, if I want to use the default keys, I can do some crazy things with that key function. So I say not used, I can actually set the keys to false. So I can actually disable it, that way as well. So that was kind of cool. On line 23, you're seeing the options. So I take whatever options are coming in, and I either give it back if I'm using the defaults, or I start to modify that option. So you notice, one of the things you probably notice when I do telescope, my search box is always up the top. From an ergonomic standpoint, you're better, as much as you can, looking at your screen is better than doing this all the time, because it's, neck stress and stuff like that. So bringing those prompts up to the top for me really relieves a lot of the stress. It's easier to find it, and I tend to prefer it that way. So that's one of the customizations I do. I change the layout strategy, and I don't use tabs within Neovim, so I do the Win blend to 0. So anything to do with tabs from a LazyVim standpoint, or I should say not LazyVim, from a Neovim standpoint, I just don't use tabs. I know that a lot of people like the workflow. For me, it's too much clutter on the screen. I just don't like it. When I'm looking at a screen, you're going to notice I'm going to change buffers, okay? So I'm in the telescope buffer right now. Now I'm in the NvChad colorizer, and the Lua line is moving with me, right? So whatever buffer is the current buffer, I want that Lua line to go with me. That is not a LazyVim default. So for example, if I did a split, I'm just typing it out just to show it, I want that colorizer moved, because for me that's a visual clue of which one of the splits that I'm in inside of Neovim. That's just a workflow that I've used for years, and that one is a really hard habit for me to break. The default for LazyVim is good. It's just I got used to this, so I just said, I want to learn how to configure it that way. So that was one of the reasons I started figuring out how to customize the LazyVim plugins, because I had a workflow that worked for me and I wanted to figure out how to do it. The TMUX, not TMUX, if we go back and look at the telescope again, so we'll just go back to a single window here, you'll notice that the options, if I want to use the options file, you know, it's if I want to use my options, all I'm doing is setting the options and get rid of it. Now there's a couple other, you know, excuse me. There's a couple other plugins, you know, like if I want to look at to do, so if I can search in here to do, I've done a video on this one. So this is how I configure to do. Okay, it's nothing fancy. So one of the things I do in this particular plugin is I'm bringing my globals back in, I'm setting the to-do comment name, and then I'm doing, if it's enabled, I want to do something special with the key maps. I can play around with the different ways I can find the word YouTube and highlight them. And then for this particular demo, one of the things I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up getting a little bit smarter than commenting out. I'm going to give myself the ability to enable or disable a particular comment. I don't know how I'm going to do that yet, but I'm going to get it to where these two options are going to be optionally added to the keywords, so I can do that dynamically as opposed to commenting out a line of code. So this, again, you're seeing the same pattern. You know, to do, checking if it's enabled. I want to do something with keys. I set the keys. Get the LazyVim spec started, figure it out if it's enabled, and away we go. So some of these other plugins, you know, that maybe they don't load at startup. So what I want to do is we want to take a look at NvChad comp. Get out of this really quick. Or take a look at comp. So you're going to notice in this one, this is a huge one. You know, this thing's got a lot of stuff in it. You got a bunch of dependencies with the way I do it. You can, you know, that the way you've done your dependencies, those things are going to get loaded, et cetera, et cetera. LazyVim does a really good job at that, so it's really kind of cool. But if I want to just play with comp and I want to find out how LazyVim has done it, I just go in and turn that thing to, I just go ahead and turn that thing to, you know, use the defaults to true, and so none of my code actually gets used. But if I want to start playing with things, then I start turning this option on. I go in here and start playing around with, I can start playing around with different things in here, right? And I can play around with what the windows look like. Some of these things probably I don't need to set. It's just I've had this file laying around for such a long time that I just kind of keep it to remind myself of what it's doing. You know, you've got different classes, different keyboard, different key bindings that you know, I'm always playing around with the key bindings. So one of the other things I did was for a while there, I had all my key bindings in one place. You know, I had one file, so I had all my key bindings, you know, right here. So what I started to do as I started doing the massive refactoring was I thought, why don't I just take the keys that are associated with the plugin and put them really close to the plugin. And then in this file is really nothing but, you know, keys that are not associated with the plugin, right? So that's really all these guys are. So you're seeing me navigate around using something I found in Carl Levang's wiki page. So I'll have some notes down for that as well. So hop around in here, we do find buffers, see what we want to take a look at. So we got a bunch of buffers in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to get out of Neovim completely, and it's going to say, yeah, I've changed it, go ahead and save it, yeah, do all that stuff, right? So just all the files, you know, we got that little nice exit thing we're going on. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to hop into Neovim, right? Just go right in. So I have a 29.68 millisecond startup time. Still happy with that. Again, when you see some of the stuff that I've loaded, I've got 16 plugins. One of my videos, I was driving my plugins down as low as I can get them to get an actually useful environment. I was down around 10 plugins. So I'm really, my goal is to try to keep it under 50 milliseconds as best I can. I really like it was down a lot lower. But you know, you can get lost in the weeds playing with your startup time. But one of the things you notice is that it's got a couple of the TMUX plugins are running. Those plugins are loaded. So I'm gonna create another session just to show you. If I run Neovim now, I'm not inside of TMUX now, and I go in here, I only have 14 plugins loaded. Okay, that's because of one of those global functions is you know, in TMUX. If in TMUX it causes two other plugins to get loaded. So you've got the TMUX bundle runner, which is very lazy, and TMUX runner. It's associated and linked to TMUX bundle TMUX runner. So the combination of those two things, I get different power when those things start. So for me, I didn't want the TMUX stuff loaded if TMUX wasn't there. There was no reason to load it. So I figured out how to make that work, and that worked out pretty cool. So also some of the things that you can do with your environment is most every day. I've got the latest version of Neovim, whatever the team has built, I'm using it. But if I go back in there and I want to look at my startup time, I want to look at the plugins, my profiles. If I want to, go into Mason, I can go into Mason and check for anything that needs to be changed. And so this is stuff I'm doing all the time. I do it several times during the day at times. Okay, there's a couple things that need to be changed. Whoop-de-doo, let's do it, right? And if it blows up, who cares? I'm just going to nuke my Neovim environment and start over. So that's the reason I bootstrap all this stuff. So to wrap up, what we're going to do is, we're just going to take a quick look at we'll go back to Neovim, we'll start over, and we're just going to bring up the NVim tree. So remember, LazyVim uses or looks for in a Lua config 4 files, and it will load those 4 files. You do not explicitly load those files. So if you have an auto commands file and you want to use my stuff, modify your auto vim configuration to include config.traap.auto commands, and then that file is loaded, right here. That's it. Now, I don't have my environment set up quite as cool as the LazyVim team does, so let me show you what I mean by that. I think it would be really cool to get to the point where I could do something like that, where I was importing plugins extra boom. Okay, so my stuff was just automatically getting included the same way these imports are being done right here. So they would be being downloaded as needed, as opposed to being part of my entire Neovim configuration. That's another refactor project. Maybe I'll get to that one, So remember, if you want to use my stuff, the steps that you need to follow, you grab my Traap directory, right? So you grab this directory, grab everything in it, you drop it in your stuff. It's not, this directory, Traap and below, is not going to conflict with anything you've got. If you want to learn a little bit about some of the functions I'm doing, they're all pretty straightforward. I try to make the code really easy to follow. And then if you look at my plugins, the plugins are on a per plugin basis. So I keep the plugins as small as I can get them. So if I want to modify, anything at all, like, tree sitter, there is a file for a tree sitter. If I want to take a look at, NVim Mason, there is a file for Mason, and I don't have a lot of dependencies between files. So if you get into, FZF, you're going to see that FZF is a pretty straightforward small file. There's not a lot going there. You've got the event enabled and dependencies. Nothing complicated there. So the only thing that's needed to make that work is my globals. Okay, and then you've got a well-formed, LazyVim specification. So on the customize, that's that big table. So if you don't have a customized flag, or however you go about doing customization, I found this works really well. It is a little tedious to get it set up, but hey, here it is. So if you got some ideas to make it better, take my file, copy it, do a pull request, give me some suggestions, because anything I can do to make this better, make it easier for other people to beg, borrow for me is great, because I'm just trying to contribute to a community that's helped me and enjoy programming and doing things like this all the time. Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Traap. Hope you have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day, and may God bless you.